Matilda's hand hovered over the final piece. The card trembled between her gloved fingers, not from nerves, but from the effort of containing her rage. Across the felt-lined table, Jude Thornbury, Duke of Thorpe, sprawled in his chair with the practiced indolence of a man who'd never faced genuine consequence. "You're wasting everyone's time," he drawled, loud enough for the assembled gentlemen to hear. The backroom of Whitmore's reeked of their self-satisfaction, brandy fumes and tobacco smoke thick as London fog. "Fold now, and I'll let you slink away with some dignity intact. Welcome, my beautiful family, to today's story. I'm so grateful you're here with me. If you're new to our community or you've been here from the beginning, I want you to know how much your presence means. We're building something special together, a space where stories of resilience, love, and finding worth in a world that often overlooks us can flourish. We're on a mission to reach 1,000 subscribers, and I truly need your support to make that happen. If this story touches your heart, if these characters speak to something within you, please hit that subscribe button. Share this with someone who needs to hear that they're not broken, just beautifully real. Every single subscriber helps us grow this family, and together we're proving that there's an audience for stories about people who bloom in darkness, who refuse to be invisible, and who find love not despite their scars but because of their authentic courage. Your support means everything. Let's build this community together. Now, let's get into the story. Matilda's throat tightened. Around them, the wood-paneled walls pressed close, gilded sconces casting long shadows over faces eager for her humiliation. She was the only woman permitted in this sanctum, and only because her patron, Lord Ashford, had called in decades of favors to secure her entry. They tolerated her presence the way one might tolerate a performing monkey. Entertaining until it became tiresome. "I don't fold," she said, her voice cutting through the murmurs. She laid her card face up with surgical precision. The Duke's expression flickered. Something passed behind those storm-gray eyes, surprise, perhaps, or the first stirrings of actual attention. His fingers drummed against the mahogany armrest, a staccato rhythm that matched the pulse hammering beneath her jaw. Stubborn. He leaned forward slightly, studying her as if seeing her for the first time. "I do appreciate tenacity, though I wonder," he made his counter-move, blocking her obvious path to victory. "If you truly understand the position you're in, Miss Vale." The false name tasted like ash. Matilda Vale, ward of the deceased Lord Ashford, a convenient fiction that allowed her to exist in these spaces without igniting the scandal that would erupt if they knew the truth. If they discovered she was Matilda Carrington, rightful heir to the Eastwick estates, daughter of the man Jude's own associates had destroyed. Her father had expected her to accept their verdict with grace, to marry some lesser baron and forget the injustice. To be silent, accommodating, invisible. Here, she could be something else entirely. "I understand precisely where I am, Your Grace." She shifted her strategy, revealing an angle of attack he hadn't anticipated. "The question is whether you do." A ripple of interest moved through the watching crowd. Jude's mouth curved, not quite a smile, but sharp enough to draw blood. Fascinating. He shifted closer, and she caught the scent of bergamot cologne and something darker underneath, like gunpowder or ambition. "Tell me, Miss Vale, when you win this match," his voice dropped to something between a purr and a threat. "What will you demand as your prize?" "The deed to Eastwick Manor." She said it without hesitation, without revealing how desperately she needed those papers. Nothing more. How disappointingly transactional. His next move cut off two of her routes simultaneously. "But if you win this match," he paused, letting the room lean in. "I'll marry you." The words detonated like an artillery shell. Laughter erupted, coarse, dismissive, the easy mockery of men who'd never been the joke. Matilda's vision narrowed to a pinpoint, her fingers bloodless where they gripped the table's edge. Heat crawled up her neck, not embarrassment but pure, molten fury. "How extraordinarily generous," she said, each word edged with acid, "to offer a prize I'd sooner set ablaze than accept." Jude's eyebrows rose fractionally. Then that almost smile returned, sharper now, genuinely intrigued. "Well then, I suppose you'll have to lose. For your own sake, of course." "I don't lose. Everyone loses eventually, Miss Vale." He captured one of her key pieces with casual brutality. "The secret is choosing when." Matilda's jaw set. She saw it then, the path he'd missed, the weakness in his arrogance. 3 moves. That's all she needed. She made the first. His smirk wavered. The second move landed like a blade. His posture straightened, fingers stilling on the table. The third move was checkmate. The room exploded. Voices crashed over each other in waves of shock and disbelief. Lord Ashford's elderly companion, Marcus, let out a bark of triumph. Lady Winters, watching from her position near the door, the only other woman permitted as Matilda's nominal chaperone and co-conspirator, raised her glass in silent, deadly acknowledgement. And Jude, Duke of Thorpe, stared at the board as though it had committed high treason. "Impossible," someone hissed behind her. "Blind luck," another voice sneered. Matilda rose, smoothing the dark velvet of her gown with hands that wanted to shake but refused. "Thank you for the match, Your Grace. Perhaps next time you'll think twice before making wagers you can't afford." She turned toward the door, but his voice arrested her mid-step. "Miss Vale." She looked back. He was standing now, tall enough that she had to lift her chin to meet his eyes. What she saw there wasn't rage, it was something far more dangerous. Interest, sharp and calculating, burning like phosphorus. "I always honor my commitments," he said quietly, each word deliberate. "Even the reckless ones. Then perhaps you should make fewer of them, Your Grace." She walked away before he could reply, before the tremor in her knees could betray her. Behind her, she felt his gaze like a brand between her shoulder blades, tracking her across the room until she vanished through the doorway. In the corridor's relative darkness, Matilda finally permitted herself to breathe. She'd won. She'd actually won. And she had the sick, certain feeling she'd just made everything infinitely more dangerous. 3 years ago, Matilda Carrington had learned 2 immutable truths about survival. The first, she was exceptional at deception. At her father's crumbling estate, before the creditors seized it, before he'd drunk himself into an early grave, she'd been the dutiful daughter. She'd practiced watercolors until her brushes frayed. She'd played melancholy sonatas on their deteriorating pianoforte. She'd nodded demurely while her father raged about honor and ruin, while inside her mind calculated exactly how much had been stolen, and by whom. The second truth, she had an almost supernatural talent for strategy games. Cards, chess, probability, her mind saw patterns others missed, vulnerabilities hidden in plain sight. Lord Ashford had discovered this during that terrible final winter. Her father's closest friend, the only man who believed the Carringtons had been defrauded rather than simply incompetent. When Ashford had witnessed her playing against his steward, and winning, something had shifted in his expression. "You have a gift," he'd said, studying her as though seeing something valuable in wreckage. "And gifts, properly deployed, can be weapons." He'd been right. Ashford had independent wealth, radical convictions about women's capabilities, and a complete disregard for society's opinion. He believed women deserved education, autonomy, and the right to fight their own battles. The Ton tolerated him because his money and title made him untouchable. Other men found him eccentric and vaguely threatening. Matilda had found him essential. That first year, Ashford had taught her the underground world of London's gambling elite, the codes, the hierarchies, the weaknesses. The second year, he'd introduced her to Lady Margaret Winters, a widow with sharp eyes and sharper instincts, who'd agreed to serve as Matilda's sponsor and shield. When they'd seen what she could do at the tables, Ashford had proposed something audacious. "There's a game," he'd said. "Invitation only. The highest stakes in England. Men who control land, policy, fortunes." His eyes had been bright with possibility. "Men who destroyed your father. She'll be ruined," Lady Winters had warned. "Not at the tables, she's brilliant enough. But the moment her real identity surfaces, her reputation will be annihilated. Every door in society will slam shut. Then we ensure her real name never surfaces." And so Matilda Vale had been born. A fiction built to reclaim the truth. The scandal reached Jude's breakfast table before his coffee had cooled. "Betrothed to a nobody," Lord Pemberton announced, tossing the morning gossip sheet onto the mahogany with theatrical disgust. "The Duke of Thorpe, brought low by a woman who probably can't even trace her lineage past her grandmother's scullery maid." Jude's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Around the table at his Mayfair townhouse, 5 men who'd witnessed last night's debacle wore expressions ranging from barely concealed glee to genuine concern. They'd come ostensibly to discuss railway investments. In reality, they'd come to watch him squirm. "You can't possibly honor this farce," Pemberton continued, warming to his subject. "A jest gone wrong. Everyone understands that. Simply pay the girl off and be done with it." "I gave my word." Jude's voice was quiet, controlled. "Dangerous. To a fortune hunter playing at cards. Your word is wasted on." "Enough." The single word cut like a blade. Jude set down his cup with exaggerated care. "Gentlemen, I believe our business is concluded." They left in a flurry of uncomfortable silence and knowing glances. The moment the door closed, Jude's carefully maintained composure cracked. He'd spent the night replaying that final sequence of moves, searching for where he'd miscalculated. Not just the game, though that stung like a reopened wound, but the entire situation. He'd meant to humiliate her, to put an upstart woman back in her place with a wager so absurd it would expose her pretensions. Instead, she'd called his bluff and won. Worse, he couldn't stop thinking about the look in her eyes when he'd made that offer. Not fear or excitement, but pure, incandescent fury. As though he'd insulted her far more gravely than society would ever recognize. The note arrived at noon, delivered by a street urchin who vanished before Jude's butler could question him. The handwriting was elegant, economical, the Serpentine, 3 o'clock. "Come alone, or don't come at all. M.V." He should have ignored it. Should have sent his solicitor to negotiate whatever settlement would make this nightmare disappear. Instead, at 2:45, he found himself striding through Hyde Park with his collar turned up against the October wind. She was waiting by the water's edge, dressed in charcoal gray that made her nearly invisible against the overcast sky. No chaperone. No pretense of propriety. When she turned at his approach, her expression was unreadable. "Your Grace." No curtsy. No deference. "Miss Vale." He stopped 3 paces away, maintaining the careful distance society demanded. Though I suspect that's not your real name. No. It isn't. She studied him with those unsettling dark eyes. My name is Matilda Carrington. The name hit him like a fist to the sternum. Carrington. The family, his associates, his father's former business partners, had systematically destroyed 5 years ago over disputed mining rights. He'd been abroad at Cambridge when it happened, but he remembered the whispers. Fraud allegations. Financial ruin. The father's death barely a year later. You wanted revenge. It wasn't a question. I wanted what belongs to me. Her voice was steel wrapped in velvet. The Eastwick Estates. My father's land. The property your associates, including your cousin, Lord Harrington, stole through forged documents and paid off magistrates. That's a serious accusation. It's the truth. And I have proof. She withdrew a folded document from her cloak. Lord Ashford spent 3 years collecting it before he died. Letters. Ledgers. Testimony from the clerks they bribed. Enough to bring criminal charges against half the men who drank brandy in that room last night. Jude's mind raced. If what she claimed was accurate, the scandal would destroy families, ruin fortunes. His own reputation would suffer by association, his cousin's crimes reflecting on the Thornbury name. Why tell me this? He asked carefully. Why not simply take your evidence to the magistrate? Because the magistrate who originally ruled against my father is still in office. Because every solicitor I've approached has refused to take my case once they learned who I'd be accusing. Because I'm a woman with no family, no fortune, and no standing. Her hands clenched at her sides. I needed leverage. I needed something that would force doors open, make powerful men listen. A marriage to a duke. Understanding dawned, cold and bitter. I didn't ask for your mockery last night. But once you offered it, I took it. She lifted her chin, defiant. As your wife, I'll have legal standing. Social position. The ability to pursue my case without being dismissed as a hysterical woman seeking attention. And if I refuse? Pay you off as Pemberton suggested? Then I'll take my evidence to the scandal sheets instead of the courts. Your cousin will hang, your grace. And the Thornbury name will be dragged through every newspaper in London as the family who protected a fraud and a thief. It should have felt like a threat. Instead, standing there in the grey autumn light, watching this woman who'd beaten him at his own game, Jude felt something uncomfortably close to admiration. You planned this. The pieces fell into place. The entire performance. You knew I'd make some arrogant wager. I knew men like you always do. For the first time, something like exhaustion crossed her features. I'm not asking you to love me, your grace. I'm not even asking you to like me. I'm asking you to honor the word you gave in front of 24 witnesses. 3 months. That's all I need to file the legal claims and see them through. After that, we can seek an annulment. Quietly. No one need know the marriage was never consummated. The wind picked up, sending dead leaves skittering across the path between them. Jude studied her, this woman who turned his arrogance into her weapon, and made a decision that would change everything. No annulment, he said quietly. If we do this, we do it properly. A real marriage, at least in appearance. Anything less and society will tear you apart anyway, proof or no proof. Matilda's eyes widened fractionally. Why would you agree to that? Because, Jude said, surprised by his own certainty, I think you might be telling the truth. And if my cousin really did what you claim, then I'd rather expose it myself than have it explode in my face later. He paused. Also, Miss Carrington, you beat me at cards. That doesn't happen. Ever. Which means you're either extraordinarily lucky, or extraordinarily dangerous. And if I'm both? Despite everything, Jude smiled. Then I suppose we're both about to have a very interesting few months. The crossbow bolt missed Matilda's throat by 3 inches. She'd been crossing the courtyard behind Lady Winter's townhouse, returning from the modiste with fabric samples she'd never asked for, when the iron-tipped projectile punched through the space where her head had been a heartbeat earlier. It embedded itself in the brick wall with a sound like breaking teeth, vibrating with the force of impact. Matilda didn't scream. Training, years of suppressing every natural reaction, kept her silent as she dropped into a crouch, fabric samples scattering across wet cobblestones. Her mind catalogued details with crystalline clarity. The bolt's trajectory suggested a rooftop shooter, probably the abandoned warehouse across the lane. Professional work. This wasn't a robbery or a crime of passion. Someone wanted her dead. Lady Winters found her there 60 seconds later, still frozen, staring at the bolt with its distinctive black fletching. The older woman took one look at the projectile, another at Matilda's bloodless face, and made a decision. Inside. Now. We're sending for the Duke. Jude arrived within the hour, his carriage clattering to a halt with enough force to scatter pedestrians. He took the servants' entrance, came up the back stairs, and appeared in Lady Winter's sitting room looking like vengeance in wool and leather. Show me. No preamble. No pleasantries. Lady Winters led him to the courtyard. Jude examined the bolt without touching it, his jaw progressively tightening. When he finally spoke, his voice was dangerously soft. Black veins. Crossbow, not longbow, which means close range and deliberate aim. He glanced up at the roofline Matilda had identified. Professional. Expensive. This wasn't a random attack. I'm aware, Matilda said from the doorway. She'd steadied herself in the intervening minutes, forced her breathing back under control. Someone knows what I'm planning. What we're planning. Or someone wants to prevent the wedding. Jude turned to face her fully, and she saw something new in his expression, not pity, but a predatory alertness. You're staying at Thornbury House. Tonight. Absolutely not. We're not even formally engaged yet. We announced the engagement this morning. I had the notice sent to every paper in London. He cut across her protest with surgical efficiency. By noon tomorrow, it will be common knowledge. Which makes this, he gestured at the bolt, either remarkably well timed, or the first move in something much larger. Lady Winters cleared her throat. He's right, my dear. You're not safe here. My staff is loyal, but they're not equipped to handle assassins. The Duke's estate, however, has walls, guards, and enough fortifications to withstand a siege. Jude's tone brooked no argument. We'll frame it as wedding preparations. You moving in early is unconventional, but so is everything about this arrangement. Society will gossip, but they won't be able to act on it if you're behind Thornbury's gates. Matilda wanted to refuse. The thought of surrendering even this much independence, of placing herself under his protection and therefore his control, made her skin crawl. But the bolt in the wall argued more persuasively than pride. Fine. But I want my own quarters. Separate wing. And I retain the right to leave when I choose. Agreed. With one condition, you don't leave without armed escort. His gray eyes held hers. I meant what I said at the Serpentine, Miss Carrington. If we're doing this, we do it properly. And properly means keeping you alive long enough to see your justice served. They moved her belongings at dusk, using Jude's unmarked carriage in a route that doubled back through 3 different streets. Matilda watched London slide past the curtained windows, the city she'd fought so hard to conquer suddenly feeling like enemy territory. Thornbury House rose from Belgravia like a monument to old money and older power. The limestone facade glowed pale gold in the gaslight, 4 stories of Georgian symmetry guarded by iron railings and stone griffins. Jude's staff materialized from the shadows, a housekeeper with kind eyes and suspicious posture, footmen who moved like soldiers, a butler who studied Matilda as though cataloging her weaknesses. "Mrs. Carlyle will show you to the East Wing," Jude said as they entered the marble-floored entrance hall. "It's the most secure section of the house. Windows face the interior courtyard, only one access point, and my rooms are directly adjacent should anything happen." "How reassuring," Matilda murmured, but her sarcasm felt thin even to her own ears. Mrs. Carlyle led her up a sweeping staircase and through corridors lined with ancestral portraits, generations of Thornbury men staring down with varying degrees of aristocratic disdain. The East Wing was indeed separate, connected to the main house by a single locked door. Her suite consisted of a bedroom, sitting room, and private study, all decorated in burgundy and cream. "His Grace has stationed guards at both ends of the corridor," Mrs. Carlyle said, her tone carefully neutral. "And he's asked that you not open the windows after dark. For your safety, miss." After the housekeeper left, Matilda stood at the window, still open, still light enough to be safe, and looked out at the manicured gardens below. Somewhere beyond those walls, someone wanted her dead. Someone who knew she'd won that game, knew about the engagement, knew she posed a threat. The question was, who had she frightened badly enough to warrant murder? A knock at the connecting door made her turn. Jude entered without waiting for permission, carrying a wooden case about the length of his forearm. "Can you use one of these?" He opened the case to reveal a small pistol, elegant and deadly. "My father taught me to shoot when I was 12. He said ladies should know how to defend their honor. Pity he didn't teach you to defend your life." Jude lifted the weapon, checked its mechanism with practiced ease. "This is a percussion cap pistol. More reliable than flintlock, less likely to misfire in damp weather. Keep it loaded. Keep it close." He placed it on the desk between them, a small piece of death rendered in polished steel and walnut. "Welcome to Thornbury House, Miss Carrington," he said quietly. "I hope you survive your stay." After he left, Matilda picked up the pistol. It was heavier than she remembered, colder. She set it in the desk's top drawer, within arm's reach, and tried not to think about the fact that she might actually need to use it. Outside, darkness fell over London like a shroud. And somewhere in that darkness, her enemy was watching. The library clock struck 2 in the morning as Matilda rubbed her burning eyes. They'd been at this for 6 hours, cross-referencing Lord Ashford's documents against shipping manifests and land registry records Jude had procured through channels she suspected weren't entirely legal. "Here," Jude said, leaning across the mahogany desk to point at a ledger entry. His shirt sleeves were rolled to his elbows, waistcoat unbuttoned, cravat discarded hours ago. The informality should have made him less imposing. Instead, it made him dangerously human. This payment, £500 to a clerk named Whitmore. That's the same name on the forged deed transfer. Matilda leaned in to examine the notation, and suddenly became acutely aware of how close they were. His breath stirred the loose tendrils of hair at her temple. She could smell the faint scent of ink and bergamot, could feel the heat radiating from his body in the cool library air. The signature matches, she said, forcing her attention back to the document. Which means we can trace the money directly from your cousin's accounts to the man who falsified my father's records. It's enough for an indictment. Jude didn't move away. With this and the testimony from the warehouse foreman you found, we could file charges by the end of the week. Victory should have tasted sweet. Instead, Matilda felt a strange tightness in her chest as she turned her head to respond, and found his face inches from hers. His gray eyes had darkened to something like smoke, and the way he was looking at her made her pulse hammer against her throat. Matilda. Her name in his voice was different than it had ever been. Not Miss Carrington, not even said with the careful formality he'd maintained for weeks. Just her name, rough and low and wanting. Don't. But she didn't pull away. Don't what? His hand came up, slowly, giving her time to retreat. When she didn't, his fingers traced the line of her jaw with devastating gentleness. Don't acknowledge that this has been building since the moment you laid that final card. It had been. God help her, it had been. Every charged silence across the dinner table, every time their fingers brushed passing documents, every night she lay in her bed knowing he was just beyond that connecting door. She tried to convince herself it was simply proximity, forced intimacy breeding false feelings. But when he leaned closer, when she felt the whisper of his breath against her lips, there was nothing false about the way her body responded. She kissed him first. Or maybe he kissed her. Later, she wouldn't be able to say who closed that final distance. All she knew was the shock of his mouth on hers, the way his hand slid into her hair, scattering pins across the desk. He tasted like the brandy they'd been sharing, dark and burning, and when she made a sound low in her throat he responded by pulling her closer, deeper, until she was half standing, pressed against him with the desk digging into her thighs. His other hand found her waist, spanning the curve of it through layers of silk and whalebone. She felt branded by his touch, claimed, and for one reckless moment she didn't care. She wanted this, wanted him, with an intensity that terrified her. Then his fingers began working at the buttons of her bodice. Reality crashed back like ice water. Matilda shoved him away so hard he stumbled back against the bookshelf. Her breath came in ragged gasps, her carefully constructed composure in ruins around her. No. The word came out strangled. We can't, I can't. Jude steadied himself, chest heaving, looking as wrecked as she felt. Matilda. This is exactly what I was afraid of. She backed toward the door, hands shaking as she tried to repair her destroyed hairstyle. I came here for justice. For my father's name. Not to become some duke's plaything, not to lose myself in, she gestured helplessly at the space between them. You think that's what this is? His voice had gone cold. You think I'm trying to seduce you into submission? Aren't you? She heard the unfairness even as she said it, but panic made her cruel. Once we're married, once I'm legally yours, what's to stop you from dismissing my case? From deciding your cousin's reputation matters more than my justice? From turning me into just another obedient wife who knows her place? The words hung between them like drawn blades. I see. Jude straightened his waistcoat with deliberate movements, his expression shuddering closed. You've decided I'm the villain in your story. How convenient that must be, reducing everything to simple categories. The evil aristocrat and the righteous victim. That's not what Isn't it? He gathered the scattered documents with sharp, angry precision. I've spent 3 weeks helping you build this case. I've put my own family at risk. I've given you sanctuary, protection, access to resources you could never have obtained alone. But none of that matters, does it? Because I'm a duke, and dukes are all the same. You don't understand. Her voice broke. I can't afford to trust you. I can't afford to want you. The moment I do, the moment I let my guard down, I become powerless. I've seen what happens to women who marry for passion instead of strategy. They disappear. Their desires disappear. They become extensions of their husbands, and I cannot. Then don't. The finality in his tone was worse than anger. Continue your investigation, Miss Carrington. File your charges. I'll provide whatever support you require, as agreed. But don't expect me to apologize for wanting something real with you. And don't insult us both by pretending you didn't want it too. He left, taking the documents and the warmth with him. Matilda stood alone in the vast library, surrounded by books and broken trust, and pressed her fingers to her still-burning lips. She'd protected herself. She'd maintained her boundaries, her autonomy, her control. So why did it feel like she'd just lost something irreplaceable? Outside, rain began to fall, soft and relentless against the windows. She listened to it for a long time, trying to convince herself she'd made the right choice. Trying, and failing utterly. They hadn't spoken in 3 days. Not since the library. Not since Matilda had drawn a line she wasn't sure she'd ever be able to cross back over. Jude took his meals in his study. She took hers in her rooms. They communicated through Mrs. Carlyle and terse notes about the investigation. Professional. Distant. Utterly miserable. The package arrived on the 4th morning, delivered by a liveried footman from a Bond Street jeweler. Mrs. Carlyle brought it to Matilda's sitting room on a silver tray, her expression carefully neutral despite the gossip that must be running rampant through the servants' quarters. A wedding gift, miss. From Lord and Lady Pemberton, according to the card. Matilda's hand stilled over her correspondence. Pemberton, the man who'd called her a nobody at Jude's breakfast table, who'd urged him to pay her off and be done with it. The man who'd been vocally opposed to their engagement. How thoughtful of them, she said, her tone suggesting the opposite. The box was exquisite, wrapped in ivory silk with a wax seal bearing the Pemberton crest. Inside, nestled in velvet, lay an ornate music box crafted from what appeared to be rosewood and mother-of-pearl. A small card in elegant script read, "To the future Duchess. May your union bring harmony. Pemberton." Something about it felt wrong. The gift was too generous for a man who despised her, too conciliatory after weeks of public criticism. Miss. Mrs. Carlyle hovered near the door. Shall I have it placed in your room? No. Leave it here. Matilda stood, studying the music box from a safer distance. And fetch the Duke. Immediately. Mrs. Carlyle's eyes widened but she didn't question the order. 5 minutes later, Jude strode into the room, still dressed for riding, mud-splattered and windblown. He looked at Matilda first, a brief, burning glance that made her chest ache, then at the box. Pemberton sent this? His voice was flat, professional. So the card claims. But Pemberton hates me. Why would he send a wedding gift worth more than most families earn in a year? Jude moved closer to the table, his posture changing from casual to predatory. Did you open it? Touch it? Only the outer wrapping. Ice slid through her veins. You think it's trapped. I think Pemberton is deeply in debt to my cousin Harrington. And I think desperate men do desperate things. He pulled a letter opener from his boot, when had he started carrying weapons everywhere, and approached the music box like it might explode. Which, Matilda realized with growing horror, it very well might. "Step back," Jude ordered. "Into the corridor. If it's dangerous, you shouldn't." "Matilda. Go." The command in his voice brooked no argument. She retreated to the doorway but couldn't bring herself to leave entirely. Her heart hammered against her ribs as Jude carefully lifted the music box's lid using the letter opener, keeping his face turned away from the opening. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the mechanism engaged with a soft click. Jude moved with inhuman speed, hurling himself backward as a fine mist of powder exploded from hidden vents in the box's interior. The cloud hung in the air where his face had been seconds earlier, then slowly began to settle on the furniture and floor. The acrid smell hit Matilda immediately, bitter almonds and something chemical that made her eyes water even from the doorway. "Arsenic compound," Jude said, his voice eerily calm as he climbed to his feet. "Mixed with something to disperse it into the air when the lid opened. Anyone standing over it would have inhaled a lethal dose." He looked at her then, and the naked fear in his eyes stole her breath. "If you'd opened that alone, if you'd breathed it in, you'd be dead before I could get you to a physician." Matilda's knees buckled. She caught herself against the doorframe, her mind replaying the scenario, her hands on the lid, eager to see what was inside, the mechanism triggering, poison flooding her lungs. Dead in minutes. Dead before she could scream for help. Jude was there suddenly, his hands gripping her shoulders, steadying her. "Look at me. Matilda, look at me." She met his eyes, saw her own terror reflected back. "You're alive," he said fiercely. "You're safe. I won't let them hurt you. You could have died." The words came out broken. "You didn't know what was inside, you just—" "Yes. Simple. Absolute. I would have. I will. Whatever it takes." The careful distance they'd maintained shattered. Matilda's hands fisted in his shirt, and she was shaking, trembling so hard her teeth chattered, and he was holding her, pulling her against his chest, his heart pounding as wildly as hers. "I can't lose you," he said into her hair. "I don't care about the scandal or the investigation or what society thinks. I care that you're alive. That's all that matters. Do you understand?" She understood. God help her, she understood perfectly. Because she'd watched him risk poisoning for her, had seen him throw himself into danger without hesitation, and she realized that her carefully constructed walls weren't protecting her, they were suffocating her. "I'm sorry." Her voice muffled against his chest. "I'm sorry for what I said in the library. You're not, you've never tried to control me. I was just afraid." "Of me? Of this?" She pulled back enough to look at him. "Of wanting you so much that I forget why I can't." His hand cupped her face, thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized she'd shed. "What if you could? Want me, I mean. Without losing yourself. Is that even possible?" "I don't know." His honesty was devastating. "But I'd like to try. If you'll let me." Behind them, Mrs. Carlyle appeared with 2 footmen and began orchestrating the careful removal of the poison box. Matilda barely noticed. She was too busy memorizing the way Jude looked at her, like she was something precious and dangerous and worth every risk. "We need to move faster on the case," she said finally. "If they're willing to use poison, willing to murder me in your own house, they're getting desperate." "Agreed. We file charges tomorrow." His jaw set. "And we post guards at every entrance. No more gifts. No more visitors without my explicit approval." Jude. I nearly lost you today. His voice cracked on the words. I'm not giving them another chance. She nodded, still pressed against him, still breathing in the scent of horse and leather and safety. Outside, London continued its indifferent existence. But here, in this poisoned room with death barely avoided, something fundamental had shifted between them. She'd spent so long protecting her independence that she'd forgotten the strength that could exist in choosing to rely on someone. Choosing to trust. The Harrington ball blazed with 1,000 candles, their light reflected endlessly in gilt mirrors and champagne glasses. Matilda descended the main staircase on Jude's arm, aware of every eye in the ballroom tracking her progress. The emerald silk gown he'd insisted she wear clung to her like liquid flame, scandalously modern and deliberately provocative. Remember, Jude murmured as they reached the marble floor, Harrington thinks he's untouchable. Men like him always reveal more when they're gloating. And if he doesn't take the bait? Then we improvise. His hand tightened fractionally on hers. But he will. He can't resist showing off, especially to a woman he thinks he's beaten. Lord Edmund Harrington stood near the orchestra, holding court among a cluster of aging peers. Jude's cousin was a study in casual arrogance, perfectly tailored evening clothes, silver-shot hair swept back from a face that had once been handsome before cruelty carved its marks. He saw them approaching and his smile sharpened. Cousin. And the infamous Miss Carrington. His gaze raked over Matilda with obvious calculation. Though I suppose I should call you cousin as well now. How delightfully domestic. Lord Harrington. Matilda kept her voice pleasant, empty. What a magnificent ball. You must be celebrating something. Indeed. A recent business venture concluded quite favorably. He gestured to a passing footman for champagne. Mining interests in the north. The land acquisition proved remarkably simple once the previous owner was removed from the equation. Matilda's blood turned to ice, but she forced a vapid smile. How fortunate for you. I do admire men with a talent for acquisition. Do you? Harrington's eyes gleamed. Then perhaps you'll appreciate the artistry involved. The best acquisitions, Miss Carrington, are those where the target never sees you coming. Where they sign away their futures believing they're making sound decisions. Fascinating. Jude's tone carried just enough edge to sound competitive rather than confrontational. I must confess, Edmund, I've always wondered how you managed the Eastwick affair. The timing was impeccable. Harrington preened. Timing is everything in business, cousin. Old Carrington was already drowning in debt, it was simply a matter of accelerating the inevitable. A few well-placed rumors about his creditors calling in loans, a sympathetic magistrate willing to expedite certain legal proceedings, and voila. He sipped his champagne. The land was available for purchase at a remarkably depressed price. And the documents? Matilda's voice remained light, curious. I've heard the transfer was quite complex. Nothing a competent solicitor couldn't arrange. Though I'll admit, finding someone skilled enough to forge, he caught himself, smiled thinly. To manage such intricate paperwork required considerable resources. Forge. Jude leaned in slightly, every inch the intrigued businessman. You make it sound positively criminal. A slip of the tongue. But Harrington's eyes had gone flat, reptilian. Though between family, I think we can acknowledge that legality and morality are often negotiable concepts. The weak fall. The strong prosper. That's the natural order. And those who oppose you? Matilda asked softly. What happens to them? They learn. Harrington's gaze drifted to the musicians. Or they disappear. Take young Carrington's daughter, for instance. I heard she made quite a nuisance of herself, trying to contest the sale. Such a tragic accident when she, oh, but wait. His smile turned venomous. She's standing right here, isn't she? How careless of me. The ballroom seemed to tilt. Matilda felt Jude's hand at her back, steadying, warning. You know who I am, she said. My dear girl, I've known since the moment you won that ridiculous card game. Did you think I wouldn't recognize Carrington's eyes in his daughter's face? That I wouldn't investigate the mysterious woman who trapped my fool cousin into an engagement? Harrington's laugh was soft, poisonous. I must admit, the boldness impressed me. Right up until you became a liability. The crossbow, Jude said flatly. The poison. You. Insurance policies. Harrington examined his champagne as though discussing the weather. Nothing personal, you understand. Simply removing an obstacle before she could damage carefully constructed arrangements. Though I'll confess, the music box was particularly inspired. Pemberton owed me money, it was trivial to convince him the gift came from genuine contrition. You're confessing to attempted murder, Matilda breathed. Here. Now. I'm sharing family secrets with family. His smile was a razor. Who's going to contradict me? You. The desperate woman everyone knows is fortune hunting. Or you, cousin, the duke who's apparently besotted enough to overlook her peasant origins. He stepped closer, voice dropping. You have no proof. No witnesses. And if you pursue this fantasy of justice, I promise you, both of you, will regret it. Accidents happen so easily in London. Carriage wheels fail. Staircases prove treacherous. And reputations, once destroyed, never recover. Actually, a new voice interjected smoothly, we have excellent proof. Lord Stirling emerged from behind a marble column, flanked by two men Matilda recognized as magistrates. In his hand was a small notebook, its pages covered in rapid shorthand. Every word, Stirling said pleasantly. Documented by a trained court reporter. Along with sworn statements from 6 witnesses positioned throughout this ballroom who heard your very thorough confession. Harrington's face went the color of old parchment. You set a trap. We played chess, Matilda corrected, finding her voice again. And you walked right into checkmate. The magistrates moved forward. Harrington backed away, his composure finally cracking. You can't, I'm a peer of the realm, this is absurd. This is justice, Jude said quietly. Something you should have considered before you tried to poison my future wife. As the magistrates escorted a still protesting Harrington toward the entrance, the ballroom erupted in scandalized whispers. Matilda felt the weight of hundreds of stares, heard the gossip already forming like storm clouds. Can you walk? Jude asked softly. Or would you prefer to make a dramatic exit? She looked up at him, saw the fierce pride in his eyes, and felt something unlock in her chest. I can walk. I can do anything. She paused. Especially with you beside me. They crossed the ballroom together, and if London society wanted to judge them, let them. She'd faced down assassins and poison and a man who destroyed her father. She could handle gossip. Outside, the night air was cold and clean. Matilda breathed it in deeply, feeling the phantom weight of years lift from her shoulders. It's done, she whispered. It's begun, Jude corrected. He turned to face her fully, his hands framing her face with devastating gentleness. Now comes the interesting part. Living. She kissed him there on the steps, in full view of anyone who cared to look, and didn't care who saw. The masquerade was meant to be a celebration. With Harrington awaiting trial and the Eastwick deeds restored to Matilda's name, Lady Winters had insisted on hosting a ball to formally announce the engagement. Matilda had tried to refuse, she'd had enough of high society spectacles, but Jude had convinced her with a single argument: let them see you triumphant. Let them see what they underestimated. So she wore a gown of midnight blue silk and a silver mask shaped like a swan, and tried to pretend the prickling unease at the base of her skull was simply nerves. The Winters estate glowed with fairy light strung through the garden paths. Inside, the ballroom swirled with masked figures, identities hidden behind feathers and jewels and elaborate disguises. Matilda had lost track of Jude 20 minutes ago, pulled away by Lord Stirling to discuss legal particulars. She told herself the separation was fine, that she didn't need constant protection now that Harrington was in custody. But something felt wrong. She stepped onto the terrace for air, the October night crisp against her exposed shoulders. The garden stretched before her, paths disappearing into artfully arranged shadows. She was about to turn back when a familiar voice stopped her. "Matilda. Thank goodness I found you." She turned to see Marcus, Lord Ashford's elderly companion, the man who'd helped her enter the gambling dens, who'd been her ally for 3 years. His mask was pushed up on his forehead, his expression urgent. "Marcus? What's wrong? There's been a development. Evidence we missed." He glanced back at the ballroom nervously. In the old groundskeeper's cottage, at the edge of the property. Documents that could implicate others in Harrington's scheme. I didn't want to bring them through the ballroom, too many eyes. Every instinct screamed danger, but this was Marcus. The man who'd mourned Ashford alongside her, who'd spent countless hours helping her build her case. "Show me," she said. They walked down the garden path, fairy lights giving way to moonlight and shadow. The cottage loomed ahead, dark and silent. Marcus pushed open the door, and Matilda stepped inside. The blow came from behind, a cloth pressed over her nose and mouth. She inhaled reflexively and the world tilted, her limbs going heavy and unresponsive. She tried to fight, to scream, but the chemical on the cloth was already dragging her under. When awareness returned, she was tied to a chair, her head pounding. Marcus stood before her, and the kindly expression she'd known for years had been replaced by something cold and calculating. "I'm sorry," he said, not sounding sorry at all. "You were never supposed to get this far." Matilda's tongue felt thick, her thoughts struggling through fog. "You. It was always you." "Not always. Initially, I genuinely helped Ashford. But when he showed me what he discovered about Harrington's operation, when I realized how much money was involved." Marcus shrugged. "The old fool wanted justice. I wanted compensation for decades of servitude. Harrington paid me well to keep him informed of your investigation, to ensure you never actually succeeded. The assassination attempts were real. Harrington panicked when you won that game, when you became too visible to simply disappear. But I made sure you survived them. You were more valuable alive, leading us to any evidence Ashford might have hidden elsewhere." He leaned closer. "Until tonight. Now Harrington's arrested, the deeds are restored, and you've become a loose end. One I intend to tie off." Terror cleared her head like cold water. Matilda tested her bonds, tight, professionally done. She was still wearing the small knife Jude had insisted she carry, strapped to her thigh beneath layers of silk, but she couldn't reach it with her hands tied. They'll notice I'm missing, she said, buying time. Eventually. But you wandered into the gardens alone. So tragic when the bride-to-be was found in the pond, having stumbled in the dark. The hazards of wearing a mask and drinking too much champagne. Jude will know. He'll never believe it was an accident. Jude will grieve and move on. Men always do. Marcus drew a pistol from his coat. I won't make you suffer. Ashford would have wanted that much, at least. Matilda's mind raced. She was tied to a wooden chair, old, probably unstable. If she could tip it, create chaos, she might reach the knife. It was a desperate gamble, but desperation was all she had. One question, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Did Ashford know? Before he died? Marcus hesitated, and in that hesitation she saw the answer. He suspected. Confronted me the night before his heart failed him. I added a little something to his evening brandy to help the process along. Rage burned through the chemical haze. You murdered him. I relieved him of a failing heart and mounting debts. Almost a kindness. He raised the pistol. Any last words? Matilda threw her weight sideways with everything she had. The chair toppled, crashing into a small table. Marcus's shot went wide, the bullet splintering wood above her head. She hit the floor hard, pain exploding through her shoulder, but her hands found the knife strapped to her thigh. The blade was small, meant for cutting bindings, not fighting. But it was sharp, and Matilda had nothing left to lose. Marcus loomed over her, pistol reloading. She slashed upward, catching his wrist. He screamed, the gun clattering away. She rolled, sawing frantically at her bonds even as he lunged for her. Then the door exploded inward. Jude filled the frame like vengeance incarnate, Lord Sterling and 2 footmen behind him. He took in the scene in a single glance, Matilda on the floor bleeding, Marcus scrambling for the pistol, and moved. The fight was brief and brutal. Jude's fist connected with Marcus's jaw with enough force to drop him like a stone. Then Jude was beside her, cutting her bonds, his hands shaking as he checked her for injuries. I'm all right, she gasped. He confessed. To everything. Ashford's murder, working with Harrington. I heard. Jude pulled her against him, his heart hammering against her cheek. We heard the shot. Christ, Matilda, if we'd been 30 seconds later. But you weren't. She clung to him, the knife still clutched in her trembling hand. You came. Always, he said fiercely. I will always come for you. As Sterling's men hauled an unconscious Marcus away, Matilda let herself shake, let herself feel the terror she'd suppressed. She'd been betrayed by someone she trusted, nearly murdered by a man she'd called friend. But she'd survived. And she hadn't done it alone. Take me home, she whispered. Jude lifted her as though she weighed nothing, carrying her back through gardens that no longer felt magical, only cold. Behind them, the masquerade continued, oblivious. But for Matilda, the masks were finally off. And she could see clearly for the first time in years. The bruises on Matilda's wrists had faded to yellow by the time the solicitor arrived at Thornbury House with the final documents. Marcus was awaiting trial alongside Harrington, both men's confessions secured and witnessed. The Eastwick deeds were registered in Matilda's name, along with reparations seized from Harrington's estate that would more than restore her family's fortune. She'd won. Everything she'd fought for, schemed for, nearly died for, it was hers. So why did victory taste like ash? Jude had been distant since the masquerade. Polite, solicitous of her injuries, but there was a wall between them that hadn't existed even during their worst arguments. He took his meals in his study again. Sent messages through servants. Avoided being alone with her with such careful precision that it felt deliberate. She told herself it was merely the strain of the trials, the endless meetings with magistrates and barristers. But she knew better. He was preparing to let her go. The realization came fully formed when she found him in the library that evening, staring at papers he wasn't reading. The gaslight cast shadows under his eyes, made him look older, wearier. Jude. She closed the door behind her. We need to talk. He set down the papers with careful precision. I know. I've been avoiding this conversation, which is cowardly of me. He stood, maintaining that careful distance. Your case is concluded. The villains are in custody. Your inheritance is restored. Which means our arrangement has reached its natural conclusion. Her heart stuttered. I see. I spoke with my solicitor this morning. The engagement was never formalized legally, no banns read, no settlement papers signed. We can simply announce that upon reflection, we've decided we wouldn't suit. Society will gossip for a month, then forget. You'll be free. Free. The word felt foreign in her mouth. Yes. His voice remained carefully neutral. You came to me seeking leverage to reclaim your inheritance. You've done that. Brilliantly, I might add. But you never wanted this marriage, Matilda. You made that clear from the beginning. I won't hold you to a bargain you made under duress. She should have felt relief. This was what she'd wanted, her independence, her autonomy, her life returned to her control. No husband to answer to, no duke dictating her choices. Just Matilda Carrington, free to live as she chose. Instead, she felt like she was bleeding. What if I've changed my mind? The words escaped before she could stop them. Jude's expression finally cracked, something raw and painful breaking through. Don't. Please don't offer me pity or gratitude disguised as affection. You've spent your entire life fighting against being trapped, against becoming someone's possession. I won't be the cage you walk into out of misplaced obligation. You think this is obligation? Anger sparked, hot and clarifying. You think everything we've been through was just, what? A convenient alliance that's outlived its usefulness. Wasn't it? He turned away, shoulders rigid. You said it yourself in the library. You couldn't trust me. Couldn't afford to want me. I've given you the tools to reclaim your life. Use them. Build the future you actually want, not the one you settled for out of necessity. And what if the future I want includes you? Then you're deluding yourself. The harshness in his voice made her flinch. In 6 months, you'll resent me. In a year, you'll hate me. You'll look at the marriage certificate and see a prison, see another man who took your choices away. I care about you too much to watch that happen. You care about me. She crossed to him, forced him to face her. Then why are you making this decision for me? Why are you deciding what I want, what I can handle? Because I know you. The words exploded out of him. I know what it costs you to rely on anyone, to admit vulnerability. You've spent weeks looking over your shoulder, waiting for me to betray you the way Marcus did, the way Harrington did. Even after everything, you still can't fully trust that I won't use this marriage to control you. You're right. The admission cost her, but it was true. I am afraid. I'm terrified, actually. Because wanting you, choosing you, it means giving you the power to destroy me. And every instinct I have screams that's too dangerous. Exactly. His voice gentled, turned unbearably sad. So I'm removing the choice. You're free, Matilda. Take it. She stared at him, this man who'd protected her, fought for her, nearly died for her. Who was now trying to set her free because he thought that's what she needed. And suddenly, crystalline clarity cut through her fear. No. No. He looked stunned. No, I won't take it. I won't walk away because you've decided to play martyr. She grabbed his lapels, forced him to look at her. You're absolutely right that I'm afraid. That trust in you terrifies me. That every time I let my guard down, I panic. Her voice broke. But I'm more afraid of living without you. Of spending the rest of my life safe and alone because I was too much of a coward to risk my heart. Matilda. You asked me in the library if I could want you without losing myself. I didn't have an answer then. But I do now. She pulled him closer, close enough to feel his rapid heartbeat. The answer is yes. Because you've never tried to make me smaller. You've celebrated every sharp edge, every rebellion, every moment I've refused to be what society expects. You don't want to own me, Jude. You want to stand beside me. And that's worth the risk. His hands came up to frame her face, trembling slightly. You're sure? Because if we do this, I want all of you. Not the careful, protected version. I want the woman who beats me at cards and argues politics and refuses to be anything less than extraordinary. Then you'll have her. She smiled through the tears threatening to fall. But only if you promise me something. Anything. Promise me this isn't pity either. That you're not agreeing because you feel responsible for me, or guilty, or... He kissed her. Thorough, devastating, a claiming that left no room for doubt. When he finally pulled back, his eyes were blazing. I'm agreeing because I fell in love with you somewhere between your victory at cards and your refusal to back down from anything, even when you should. I'm agreeing because you're the most magnificent, infuriating, brilliant woman I've ever met, and I want to spend the rest of my life discovering new ways you'll surprise me. Oh. Her voice came out breathless. That works too. He laughed, the sound raw with relief, and pulled her close. Outside, London settled into evening, the city that had witnessed her fall and her resurrection continuing its indifferent dance. But here, in Jude's arms, Matilda felt something she'd never expected to feel again. Home.